My mother-in-law convinced my husband I cheated on him, so he threw me out while I was 8 months pregnant. There is this stupid little lake town that basically changed my whole life, and not in the cute movie way. I went there one summer just to get out of my own head for a while, because my friend from college had moved there for work and kept saying I needed a break. I had been stuck in the same routine for years, same job, same apartment, same routes to the grocery store, like my life had been laminated and no one told me. So I took a week off, packed a suitcase that was way too full for 7 days, and took a bus that felt like it stopped in every single small town in the country before finally dropping me off at her place. She lived in this quiet street near a little lake where the houses all kind of looked the same, like someone had copy-pasted them and just changed the doors. The first night, we sat on her tiny balcony with cheap wine and leftover pasta, and she pointed to the unit next door and went, very casually, "That is my neighbor. He is single, and you are not allowed to fall in love with him because he has that face that makes women do stupid things." I laughed because I thought she was being dramatic, and also because I had already decided I was not there to meet anyone, just to sleep and maybe remember what breathing felt like. Then he walked out to take the trash. You know that annoying moment when you are mid-sip of wine, in leggings with a random shirt, hair in a bun that you did without even looking in the mirror, and then the universe sends you someone who looks like every crush you have ever had, mixed together with a smile that is way too warm for a stranger. He waved at my friend. She waved back, introduced me from the balcony like we were in some low-budget play, and he smiled at me like he already knew I was about to embarrass myself at some point. We ended up talking that same night because my friend insisted we all go for a walk by the lake. And apparently saying no to her when she is on a mission is not an option. We walked on this path that went around the water, and he asked about my job, my city, my favorite food, little things like that, and I kept noticing how easy it was to talk to him. No weird pauses, no forced small talk, just this calm, steady interest. I remember thinking that it felt unsafe in the way that makes you want to lean in anyway. On my last night in town, he asked if I wanted to go get dinner, just the two of us. Nothing fancy, just a place near the lake where they served grilled fish and fries and the kind of salad nobody actually eats. We sat outside, the air was warm, the lights from the houses were reflecting on the water, and I could feel that stupid movie feeling creeping up even though I kept telling myself this was just a vacation fling at best. When the check came, he insisted on paying, and when we walked back along the water, he reached for my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. At some point, we stopped near this tiny dock, and he kissed me. It was not one of those dramatic fireworks kisses. It was just soft and slow and careful in a way that made my chest hurt. I remember thinking, very clearly, that I did not want to go back home yet. Of course, I did go back home the next morning, because real life does not care about lakeside kisses. We hugged by the bus stop. He told me he had really liked meeting me, and I told him the same, trying not to sound like a teenager. I got on the bus, sat by the window, and watched him get smaller as the bus pulled away. I told myself that was that. A nice little summer story I could tell my friends. Then my phone buzzed. It was him, sending a message saying he already missed me and asking if he could call later. I stared at the screen and laughed because of course my timing in life was going to be this ridiculous. What started as messages turned into nightly calls. The kind where you are lying in the dark with your phone pressed to your ear, talking about everything and nothing, feeling weirdly more awake at midnight than you had all day. We did that for weeks. Then I went back for a weekend. Then he came to my city for another. Weekends turned into every other weekend. And before I knew it, we had spent almost a year buying bus tickets and counting down days until the next visit. It was exhausting and sweet and messy and expensive. And every time I had to leave him or he had to leave me, it felt like ripping the same bandage off again and again. Around the end of that year, I saw a job posting online for a sales position in his city. I worked in sales already, nothing glamorous. Just home goods in a showroom where I spent hours walking clients through catalogs and samples, but I was good at it and I was bored out of my mind where I was. I sent him the link half as a joke and half to test the waters, and he immediately replied that I should apply, that it could be a sign, that maybe this was our chance to stop living on buses. I applied thinking nothing would come of it. And then, because life enjoys messing with me, I got the job. The weeks between the job offer and the move were a blur of packing boxes, canceling things, and listening to my mother ask if I was absolutely sure about moving for a man. I kept saying I was moving for the job and that the man was just a bonus, but I think we both knew that was only partially true. When I finally arrived in his city with my whole life smashed into a bunch of suitcases and boxes, he met me at the station, grabbed my heaviest bag without asking, kissed me right there in front of everyone, and told me we were finally done counting weekends. He had cleared space in his apartment for my stuff and said I could stay there while I got settled. It all felt very grown up and sure of itself at the time. What I did not fully grasp in those first few days was that his mother basically lived in the spaces between his sentences. I met her in person maybe 48 hours after I got there, and she knew everything about me already. Where I worked before, where my parents lived, how long the long-distance thing had been going on, even what my favorite food was because he had apparently told her every detail. At first, I thought it was kind of sweet. It meant he talked about me. Right. It meant I mattered. I was not prepared for how much she mattered to him. She showed up at the apartment unannounced, using her own copy of the key, carrying a casserole like she was in some old show. I figured she had dropped by just for that first welcome visit, and that later things would calm down. Instead, that first visit set the pattern. She would come in, put food in the fridge, comment on what was in my pantry, ask about my hours, rearrange things on the kitchen counter without asking, and make little remarks like, "You two really need a proper rug here. This floor looks bare." I kept telling myself she was just being helpful. The first time I realized it was not just helpfulness was when we went to pick out a couch. He and I had chosen one together online, something simple and comfortable that would actually fit in the living room. We were excited, talking about where we would put it, how nice it would be to watch shows together without feeling like we were sitting on two different chairs in a waiting room. His mother decided she wanted to come along, because of course she did. At the store, she immediately gravitated to this huge, stiff couch that looked like it belonged in a lobby. She sat on it like a queen and said, "This is what you need. Something that will last, not those soft ones that sag." I said I preferred the one we had picked, the softer one, and for a second he nodded like he still agreed with me. Then his mother made a little noise, that ridiculous disapproving sound people make when they see kids playing near something breakable. And suddenly he was looking at the big couch again. He said, "Maybe my mother is right. Maybe we should invest in something sturdy." I stood there watching the two of them, feeling like I was slowly disappearing. I did not want to be the girlfriend starting a war over a couch in front of a salesperson, so I let it go. We bought the couch she wanted, and I told myself it was just furniture, not a sign of anything deeper. My college friend, the one who had first invited me to this town, was already starting to fade into the background by then. I still texted her sometimes, but our lives were clearly moving in different directions, and honestly, I could feel myself getting pulled more and more into his family's orbit and less into my own friendships. She had opinions on everything: the dishes, the towels, the way I stacked the mugs. She would make little comments like, "In my house, I always did it this way, and my son likes when the sheets are tucked in tight, and you know how men can be. They do not think about hygiene until we show them." I kept smiling, kept swallowing the irritation, because I was the outsider in their long-established little system. I did not have friends in town yet. I had just started the new job, and the last thing I wanted was to start dramas too soon. So I vented to my friend over the phone and pretended in front of his mother that I was fine with her using my kitchen like it was a branch of her own house. It was around that time that I met the woman who would end up saving my sanity more times than she knows. She lived in the building next to ours, and we bumped into each other at the shared mailbox area one afternoon when I dropped half of my mail on the floor and said a word that echoed way too loudly. She laughed, helped me pick everything up, and introduced herself. She was a teacher at a nearby school, friendly in that grounded way that comes from being exhausted most of the time. We started chatting whenever we ran into each other, and eventually traded numbers. She became my default person in that building, the one who heard the first drafts of my rants about my almost mother-in-law. Meanwhile, my relationship with him kept moving forward. There were good moments too, to be fair. Movie nights, lazy Sundays. Grocery runs where we argued about which cereal to buy. It would have all been pretty normal if his mother had not been this extra presence standing behind him in every decision. He would come home and tell me stories of his day, and somehow every story included a sentence like, "My mother said," or "I asked my mother," or "My mother thinks." Sometimes it was harmless, like recipes. Sometimes it was not. When he proposed, it was on a random Tuesday night in the kitchen, with takeout containers on the counter, and my hair up with a clip. No lake, no candles, nothing dramatic, just him pulling this tiny box from his pocket and looking more nervous than I had ever seen him. He said he could not imagine his life without me, that the year of buses had proven we could handle anything, and that moving in together had been the best decision he had ever made. I said yes while laughing and crying at the same time, because for all the weirdness, I loved him. He slipped the ring on my finger, we hugged, he kissed my forehead, and then he said he could not wait to tell his mother. I should have noticed the order of that sentence. The wedding planning should have been fun. It was not. We both wanted something simple, outdoors if possible. I imagined a small ceremony with friends and some family, nothing huge. The minute his mother heard the words small and outdoors, she made a face like I had said we were getting married in a parking lot. She said weddings belong in a church. It is about respect, about tradition, about doing things properly. Before we could even have a real conversation, she had already called someone she knew and somehow reserved a church for a date that was not even confirmed yet. I remember sitting on their couch, listening to her talk about decorations and flowers for a wedding we had not agreed to, and feeling like a guest at my own life. I tried to push back, gently at first. I said we really wanted something by the water, that it felt more like us, that it was our day. She smiled in that way people smile when they are about to ignore everything you just said, and told me I was young and did not understand how important it was to do things the right way, so we would not regret later. He sat there between us, and instead of backing me up right away, he stayed quiet. Eventually, he said maybe we could compromise. She looked smug. I looked at the floor, and the whole thing turned into this weird tug of war. In the end, I dug my heels in. I told him I could not go through with a wedding that did not feel like ours. To his credit, he did speak to her, and we insisted on the lake. She sulked for weeks, made little comments about people forgetting where they came from, but she stopped pushing the church thing. I picked a dress that was simple and comfortable, something I could actually breathe in and walk around in without feeling like I was being swallowed by fabric. When she saw a picture of it on my phone, she talked for 10 minutes about how weddings are the one time a woman gets to be truly glamorous, how some moments deserve a grand gesture, how the dress I chose looked more like something for a casual party. I kept the dress anyway. I spent the weeks leading up to the wedding alternating between excitement and dread. On the actual day, she behaved exactly how you are picturing. She arrived early, started telling the photographer which angles to use, rearranged centerpieces because apparently the flowers were too low, and told the band that the music needed to be softer because she did not want the older relatives to feel attacked by noise. I lost count of how many times I had to politely tell her that the vendors already knew what to do, that everything had been planned, that she should relax and enjoy. There is a photo of me from that day where I am smiling for the camera, holding my bouquet, and if you zoom in, you can see my jaw clenched just a little. Still, we did get married the way we wanted. Outside, under open sky, with chairs that sank slightly into the grass when people sat down. We said our vows. We exchanged rings. We kissed. Everyone clapped. And for a few hours, I convinced myself that the power balance had shifted, that by standing my ground on the wedding, I had somehow established a new pattern. It felt like a victory. Then we left for the short honeymoon we could afford, and his mother called his phone so many times in those few days that he eventually started putting it on silent, just so we could have one unbroken meal. After the wedding, real life came back like a wave. We went back to our jobs, to bills, to grocery lists. Some months later, his mother lost her job. The store she worked at closed suddenly, and she called him in tears. We went over to her place that same evening, sat on her couch while she cried about how no one hires older women, how everything she had given to that place meant nothing, and how she did not know what she was going to do. Without even looking at me, he told her we would cover her rent until she got back on her feet. I felt my lungs forget how to work properly, but I also understood. She was his mother. I told myself it was temporary. Temporary turned into something else. I helped her fix her resume, sat with her at my little kitchen table going over interview questions, printed things for her at work when she asked. Every time she went to an interview, she came back with a story about how the interviewer was rude, or the place was disorganized, or the job was beneath her. Weeks turned into months, and somehow every opportunity was unsuitable. Meanwhile, our budget was groaning. We were paying our own rent, our bills, and hers, and I had this baby account where I had been trying to save a little for the future that basically stopped existing. Anytime I brought up the strain, he would say things like, "She has no one else? Just a bit longer? We will manage," which is easy to say when the numbers are more abstract to you than to the person actually tracking every dollar. Around that time, work started to wear me down. My job was sales-based, which meant my income depended heavily on commission. I was good at it, but I was tired. I started feeling nauseous at random times of the day, and at first I thought it was stress. Then I realized my period was late. The test turned positive faster than I could process the little lines forming. I sat on the edge of our bathtub staring at that plastic stick and thinking, of course I am going to be throwing up while juggling quotas and mother-in-law drama. When I told him, he cried. In a good way. He hugged me and kept saying he could not believe it, that he was going to be a father. that everything was going to be different now. For a while, his excitement carried me. We told our families. My mother screamed over the phone. His mother cried and thanked the heavens and talked about how this baby was her second chance in life. It was sweet and overwhelming and tiring all at once. As my belly grew, so did the list of people who felt like they were entitled to opinions about our future. By the time I reached the 8th month, my body felt like it belonged to someone else. I had to stop working full-time because I could not keep up with the long hours and the constant standing. My commission disappeared with the hours and my paycheck shrank to the basic salary, which was already not impressive. Suddenly, the numbers that had been tight before turned into something worse. We sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, looking at our bank account, and it became painfully clear that we could not keep paying his mother's rent and still cover our own bills plus baby expenses. I suggested we talk to her gently and be honest about the situation. He looked miserable, but he agreed. We invited her over for lunch on a Sunday, cooked her favorite dish, and tried to set up the conversation in the least threatening way possible. After we ate, I told her we had gone over our finances and that things were getting really tight with the baby coming and my income reduced. I said we would not be able to cover her rent anymore, at least not the full amount, and that maybe it was time to consider other options, like finding a cheaper place or getting a roommate. She stared at me like I had grown another head. Then she looked at him and asked if he was really going to let his pregnant wife talk to her that way. She said we were abandoning her when she needed us most, that all she had done for him apparently meant nothing now that there was a new family. She cried, she raised her voice, she threw in some guilt from his childhood for good measure, and he just sat there absorbing it. I stayed firm because I could feel the baby pressing on my ribs, and I knew that if I backed down now, I would be breastfeeding while covering 2 rents and losing my mind. Eventually, she left in a storm of hurt words, slamming the door behind her. The house felt cold after that. For a few days, things were quiet. Too quiet. She did not call. She did not visit. He walked around the apartment tense and distracted, checking his phone constantly and sighing. I asked him if he had spoken to her, and he said she needed time. I told him we also needed space to breathe without feeling like villains. He nodded, but his eyes were somewhere else. I should have noticed right there that the silence was not peace. It was preparation. One afternoon, near the end of the 8th month, I had a prenatal appointment. He said he could not go because he was catching up on work, and honestly, I understood. Or thought I did. It was hot outside. The kind of hot that makes everything feel heavier than it already is. I waddled to the clinic, waited forever in a cold room wearing a paper gown that did not fit properly, listened to the baby's heartbeat while trying not to cry from sheer exhaustion, and then finally made my way back home. I was carrying a folder with test results, a bag with prenatal vitamins, and a heart that was weirdly calmer than it had been in weeks because I had just seen my baby on a screen. When I turned the corner to our building, I saw something that did not register as real at first. There, on the small patch of concrete in front of our apartment door, was my life. Suitcases, stacks of clothes, boxes with my name written on them, a bag with baby clothes we had bought together, even a folder with documents. People from the building were pretending not to stare and failing. For a second, I thought there had been some kind of water leak or gas issue and they had to move stuff out. Then I saw the note taped to the door. I stood there in the heat, belly heavy, legs suddenly shaky, and I read the note. He had written that he knew the baby was not his, that he could not live with a liar, that he did not want me in his home anymore, and that I should go back to whatever man I had been sneaking around with behind his back. He wrote that I had until the end of the day to pick up my things or he would throw them away. He had changed the locks. I tried my key just to prove it to myself, and of course, it did not work. For a second, everything went quiet in my head, like someone had turned down the volume on the world. I called my friend from college first, the one who had once hosted me for that summer week, but her voicemail said she was out of town for work and would not be back until the following week. My neighbor, the teacher, came down the stairs slowly, like she did not want to startle me, and asked what was going on. I looked at her, then at my things, then at my belly, and the only thing that came out of my mouth was, "He thinks I cheated on him." The words felt sticky and wrong. She helped me carry some of the stuff inside her place while people kept peeking from their doors. She kept asking if I was okay, if I needed to sit, if I needed water. I sat on her couch with my hands on my stomach, trying not to panic because I had been told stress was bad for the baby, and honestly, I was one breath away from a full meltdown. My phone buzzed. It was a long message from him, paragraphs and paragraphs where he basically laid out a story that did not belong to my life. According to him, his mother had been noticing signs for months. Times when I got home later than expected, Moments when I had been on my phone and turned the screen away. Packages that had arrived when he was not home. He mentioned a man she had seen near the building, standing too close to me. Then he attached a photo. In the picture, I was standing by our front door with one of my coworkers, a guy from the office who had dropped off some work documents on his way somewhere else because I had been working from home that day. We were standing close because the hallway is narrow. You could easily spin that into whatever story you wanted if you were committed enough. He said his mother had taken that photo a week earlier and had been sitting on it, showing it to him over and over while she worked herself up. A whole week of stewing and planning, a whole week of him pulling away from me while quietly arranging my eviction from his life. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I called him, straight to voicemail. I texted, telling him that the man in the photo was a coworker, that there were emails and schedules and messages to prove it, that his mother had been twisting innocuous moments into something ugly. No reply. Hours passed. My neighbor insisted I stay with her for the night, made up the pull-out couch, put a glass of water on the coffee table, watched me like I might collapse at any second. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my own clothes piled outside my own door like I was trash. The next morning, I called my mother. I tried to sound calm, but the second I heard her voice, I broke. I told her what had happened, every horrible detail. She did that thing mothers do where they have to be both furious and practical at the same time. She said she would come. She got in her car that same day and drove in, bringing my father's old suitcase filled with things she thought I might need. She hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, and for the first time since I had moved to that city, I remembered what it felt like to be someone's child, and not just someone's partner. We found a small apartment for rent not too far away. Nothing special. Just a one-bedroom with old floors and a view of another building's wall. It looks like a place you move into when you have no choice left, which is exactly what it was. My parents helped with the deposit, my mother helped me move my things there, and my neighbor let us borrow anything we were missing for those first days. I sent him message after message telling him where I was, telling him the baby was okay, begging him to let me prove what I was saying. He read some of them because I could see the little indicator, but he never replied. When I went into labor, my mother was the one who held my hand. She was the one who yelled at a nurse when someone forgot to check on me for too long, the one who wiped my forehead, the one who cut the cord when the doctor asked if someone wanted to. I had imagined that room so many times before, with him by my side, both of us crying and laughing and freaking out together. Instead, I gave birth with a woman who had already survived enough heartbreaks of her own and still had room for mine. When they placed my baby in my arms, everything else went silent. He had his father's mouth. I wanted to scream at the universe for being so poetic in the worst way. In the days after, I sent photos to my ex, because that is what he had become by then, even if the papers had not been signed yet. I wrote that we could do a paternity test whenever he wanted, that I had nothing to hide, that I just wanted our child to have both parents if there was any chance of that being healthy. He never responded. The only thing I got from him was a message from a number I did not know, telling me a courier would be dropping off some documents for me to sign. It was the divorce paperwork. My lawyer was recommended by a coworker who had gone through her own messy split. She told me what he did. Changing the locks, dumping my things outside while I was pregnant, counted as an illegal eviction, and that I could go after him for it if I wanted. I thought about it for maybe half a day and then let it go. I did not have the money or the energy for one more fight. I just wanted to survive and focus on the baby. He had asked for a clean break, no shared property, no spousal support, nothing. He was not listed on the birth certificate, and he made it clear through his lawyer that he would not be seeking any parental rights or responsibilities. My lawyer explained that technically he was still the biological father, but without his name on the birth certificate, and without him pursuing paternity, he had no legal standing to demand custody or visitation. She said if I wanted, we could force a paternity test and pursue child support, but that would mean dragging this out and potentially forcing a man who clearly did not want to be a father into our lives. I chose to let it go. On paper, that meant I was free to make decisions alone. In my heart, it felt like he was rejecting our baby along with me. I signed. He signed quickly through his own lawyer. The divorce was finalized faster than most of my orders at the corner place where I bought coffee. One minute I was a wife, convinced we could handle anything, and the next minute I was a single mother living in a cramped apartment with my own mother, trying to rock a baby to sleep while ignoring the sound of my neighbors watching shows through thin walls. The first months were a blur of exhaustion. Feeding schedules, diaper changes, laundry that multiplied like it had its own agenda. Sometimes I would put the baby down and stand in the bathroom just to breathe for 2 minutes without anyone touching me. I cried in the shower more than I care to admit. My mother stayed longer than she had planned, partly because I begged, partly because she did not trust me not to fall apart if she left too soon. My father sent money every month, calling it his contribution to his grandchild's future. He could not take as much time off work as my mother did, but he drove in whenever he could for quick visits, always showing up with something practical like diapers or groceries, and hugging me a little longer than he used to before getting back on the road. Without them, I do not know how I would have made it. My friend in the building, the teacher, turned into an unofficial aunt. She would drop by after work with takeout, hold the baby so I could nap for exactly 20 minutes, and listen to me ramble about everything and nothing. Sometimes we would just sit there in silence, watching the baby sleep, both of us too tired to form full sentences. There was something weirdly healing about that silence. At some point through the grapevine that small cities always seem to have, I heard that my ex had a new girlfriend. Then that she had moved in. Then that they were engaged. It had been barely a year. I found out about the engagement by accident when I walked past a group of people in the grocery store talking about how quickly some men move on. Someone mentioned his name. Someone else mentioned a big proposal at a restaurant, and I stood there pretending to compare 2 brands of cereal while my heart tried to climb out of my throat. Later, another person mentioned, almost casually, that his mother adored the new woman and was always comparing her to me. Apparently, she said things like, "This one is calm, this one understands family, this one will not run around on my son." I wanted to march over to their building and shake her, scream that she was the one who had lit the match and burned everything down. Instead, I stayed home and watched my baby sleep, tracing little circles on his tiny hand while wondering if I would ever feel normal again. Years passed faster than they had any right to. By the time my son turned 3, I had developed a routine that almost felt sustainable. I went back to work once the baby was old enough for daycare, even though the idea of leaving him with strangers made me nauseous at first. The first week, I checked my phone every few minutes, convinced that I was going to get a call saying something had happened. Nothing did. Life, annoyingly enough, kept moving. I learned how to drop him off, go sell things to people who did not know what my past looked like, and pick him up with a smile even on days when I felt completely hollow inside. I developed little rituals to manage my anxiety. I would double-check that the door was locked every night. I would ignore unknown numbers. I would freeze whenever there was a knock I was not expecting. I avoided taking the route that passed by the old apartment building. I did not post pictures of my son on any social media apps. Not because I thought my ex was actively looking, but because I could not shake the idea that his mother's eyes were still everywhere. I hated that they lived in my head rent-free while I was counting every actual dollar of rent money. When my son was around 4, my job sent me to a conference in another city. It was one of those things where everyone pretends networking is not just walking around with a name tag hoping someone interesting talks to you. I went mostly because my boss insisted, and because I needed a break from my routine, even if that break involved uncomfortable shoes and fake smiles. My parents watched my son that weekend, my mother sending me pictures every hour like she thought I might forget what he looked like. On the second day of the conference, I was standing near one of those high tables, holding a paper cup of coffee that tasted like cardboard, when a man walked up and made a joke about the snacks being the only reason anyone was actually there. It was not a great joke, but he said it with a kind of tired honesty that made me laugh. We started talking. He worked in a different part of the same industry, lived in a nearby city, and had the kind of calm energy that felt like a weighted blanket in human form. He asked about my work. I asked about his. We both complained about long hours and annoying clients. At no point did he say his mother's name. I felt safe. We traded cards, then messages, then calls. I told him pretty early on that I had a child, because that is not the kind of thing I wanted to dump on someone 6 months in. He did not flinch. He asked about my son like it was the most natural thing. When he came to visit for the first time, my son took to him like kids sometimes do with people who are genuinely kind. I panicked a little. It was one thing to let someone into my life. It was another thing to let them into my son's. I tried to sabotage it. Honestly, I picked fights over small misunderstandings. I pulled back when things were going too well. I told him more than once that I was not sure I could do another serious relationship, that I had not unpacked everything from the last one. He listened, never rushed me, never turned my trauma into a project for himself. He just kept showing up. When my son got sick one weekend and I texted to say I had to cancel plans, he showed up at my door anyway, with soup and a tiny toy, and this very gentle question in his eyes, like he was asking if it was okay to care. 3 years of slowly rebuilding something I did not dare call trust led us to a small ceremony at a courthouse one spring. My son was 7 by then. No lakes, no big dresses, no centerpieces. Just me, him, my parents, my friend from the building, and my son, who insisted on wearing a little tie and took his role as ring bearer very seriously. We went to a diner after, ordered burgers and milkshakes, and I remember thinking that this was what I should have done the first time. Small, meaningful, no one rearranging anything but the condiments. At some point, he brought up the idea of adoption. Not in a dramatic way, just one night after my son had gone to bed, while we were sitting on the couch. He said he already felt like a father to him, that he would like to make it official if I was comfortable with it, and that he understood it was a big step. My stomach did that weird twist thing again, but this time it was more about how big the decision was than about fear. We talked about it for weeks. I reached out to a lawyer, asked about the process, and eventually, through the same formal channels we use to send bills and complaints, we started the legal adoption process. My ex had to be notified. That was the part that kept me up at night. The lawyer sent papers to his last known address, explaining that someone wanted to adopt his child and that he had the right to contest it. The paperwork included a formal acknowledgement of paternity, because even though everyone knew he was the biological father, he had never been officially listed as such. He could have demanded a test, dragged things out, made everything harder. Instead, he signed. He did not show up. He did not respond. He signed the consent forms through his lawyer. The hearing itself was short. We stood in front of a judge in a room with bad lighting and waited while someone read our file. The judge confirmed that my ex had been properly notified months earlier, and that he had formally consented to the termination of his parental rights as part of the adoption process. He had not contested, had not shown up, had simply signed through his lawyer. The judge asked us a few questions, asked my son how he felt about all of this, and my son said he wanted to have the same last name as the man he already called Dad. I cried, obviously. The judge smiled, signed the papers, and just like that, something that had always been true in practice became true on paper as well. For a while after that, life was almost boring in the best possible way. School runs, work, dinners, bedtime stories. My anxiety did not disappear, but it settled into something I could manage. I started to believe that the past was going to stay in the past where it belonged, which, looking back, is usually right around the time the past decides to show up at your door. It started with a message from an unknown number one afternoon. It was short. He wrote that he needed to talk to me, that it was important, that it was about our child. I stared at the screen for a long time, waiting for my chest to cave in. Then I blocked the number. I did not answer. I told myself that nothing good could come from reopening a door I had nailed shut years ago. I did not mention the message to my husband at first, partly because I did not want to worry him, partly because some small part of me was ashamed that this ghost was still able to rattle me. A few days later, there was a knock at the door while my husband was at work, and my son was in his room playing with building blocks. I checked the peephole and felt my stomach drop. He looked older, obviously, thinner. There were lines on his face that had not been there before. He had that same mouth my son had, which felt cruel. For a second, I considered pretending I was not home. Then I remembered there was a car in the driveway and toys in the front yard, and this man had once known me well enough to tell when I was lying. I opened the door halfway and kept the chain on. He asked if we could talk. His voice was soft, almost hoarse. He said it would just take a few minutes. I told him this was not a good idea, that there was nothing to talk about. He asked again, looking at me with eyes that were suspiciously shiny, and against my better judgment, I unhooked the chain and stepped aside, making sure my son's door was closed. He stood in my living room like he had walked into a museum of someone else's life. He looked at the photos on the wall, the toys in the corner, the blankets on the couch. Then he started talking. His mother had died, he said. She had been sick for a while, some kind of cancer that had spread too far by the time they caught it. He had taken care of her in the last months, taken her to appointments, fed her, listened to her stories. Right before she died, she had told him something. She had confessed that she had lied about me, that she had made up the stories about my supposed cheating, that she had twisted innocent situations into something ugly because she did not want to lose him. He said she had been heavily medicated and drifting in and out when it all came out in pieces, rambling about regrets until she finally admitted she had convinced herself I was a problem because the idea of him building a life with anyone else terrified her. She thought if I was out of the picture, he would stay close forever. Instead, she detonated everything. He cried while he said this. Real tears, or at least they looked real. He said he felt like his whole life had been a lie, that he had lost his marriage and his child because of his mother's manipulation. He said he was sorry. He said he had not known how to live with himself since he found out. He said he had left his second wife, that marriage had fallen apart too because of his own issues, because he had become controlling and suspicious like his mother had been with him. He talked like a man who had just discovered his own reflection and hated what he saw. For a moment, I did feel sorry for him. There is a part of you, when you have loved someone deeply, that remembers that love even through all the wreckage. I remembered the lake, the long calls, the way he had cried when I told him about the pregnancy. I remembered the version of him I had married, not the version who had piled my things outside our door. I could feel tears pricking my own eyes, partly for him, partly for me, mostly for the version of our child who never got what he should have. Then he said he wanted to make things right by being a father again. He said he wanted to meet our son, spend time with him, be in his life. The switch that flipped inside my chest was immediate. I wiped my face and told him that my husband had adopted our son, that legally he was no longer his father. I said that, more importantly, my son did not remember him as anything but a stranger who had once screamed in a yard. I told him that my son had a stable life now, with a father who had been there for scraped knees and nightmares and first days of school. He did not take that well. He went from crying to angry in the space of a few sentences. He said no piece of paper could erase biology. He said I had stolen his child from him. He said it was convenient that I had managed to move on and create a new little family while he was drowning in guilt. He accused me of not fighting hard enough for our marriage, of giving up too easily, of choosing the easier path by letting another man step into his role. It was almost funny, in a sick way, how he managed to turn his confession into an indictment of me. I told him, calmly as I could, that he had had years to come around, years in which I had offered him tests and conversations and chances to be involved. He had chosen to believe his mother and walk away. That choice had consequences. He kept insisting. He asked at least to see our son once, just to look at him. I said no. My hands felt weirdly cold, but my voice was steady. I said my job now was to protect my child, not to offer him up as a bandage for someone else's guilt. I reminded him that if he tried anything, we had documents showing the adoption and his renouncement of rights. He stared at me with this mix of rage and despair, then stormed out, slamming the door so hard a picture frame tilted on the wall. I told my husband everything that night. He listened quietly, jaw tight, hands clenched. He asked if I wanted to move. I laughed because he was already at the step I usually take 3 months later after spiraling. We agreed to keep an eye out, to be careful, to document any contact. I called my lawyer the next day and explained what had happened. She reminded me that legally he had no parental rights anymore, but she also said that did not stop people from trying to insert themselves where they no longer belonged. She told me to keep records of messages, calls, visits, anything that might show a pattern if we needed to ask for legal protection. For a while, nothing happened. I almost convinced myself that his visit had been a one-time explosion, that he had gotten everything off his chest and would now retreat into whatever life he was trying to rebuild. Then he started showing up in other ways. My mother called me one evening saying he had contacted her, crying over the phone, saying he wanted to be forgiven, that he wanted a chance to know his son. She told him firmly that the only person whose opinion mattered on that subject was mine, and that as far as she was concerned, he had made his bed. He started posting things online, vague messages about fathers being kept away from their children, about mothers who use the legal system to punish men, about injustices and revenge and forgiveness. People who still knew both of us would sometimes send me screenshots asking what was going on, and I would shrug or send a neutral reply even as my hands shook. I did not want to feed the narrative. I did not want to give him more material. My son was 9 when everything came crashing back. The final line for me was the day he showed up at the park. It was a Saturday afternoon, one of those rare days when everyone was free and the weather was actually decent. We had taken my son to the park to let him run around, burn some energy, play on the swings. I was sitting on a bench, sipping a drink, chatting with another parent about school things when I saw him. He was standing near the entrance of the park watching us. At first, I thought I was imagining it, because my brain loves to throw old ghosts into random crowds. Then he started walking toward the playground area. My son was on the slide, laughing, cheeks flushed. My husband was standing close by, hands ready like every parent does, even when their kids are old enough to handle basic playground equipment. My ex walked right past me, like I was air, and went straight toward my child. He called his name. My son paused on the ladder, looked over, confused, then looked back at my husband like, "Who is this man?" I jumped up so fast I nearly dropped my drink. I got between them before my ex could get any closer. I told him to leave. My voice came out louder than I intended, fueled by a kind of panic I had not felt since the day I found my stuff outside that apartment door. He said he just wanted to talk, to say hello, to see his son. I told him again that legally he was not his father anymore, and that emotionally he never had been. He insisted that he had a right to see his own blood. I pulled my phone out of my pocket with trembling hands and told him I was calling the police if he did not walk away right then. People were staring. My son was watching with wide eyes. My husband had already moved closer, placing a hand on our son's shoulder, his body angled protectively. My ex finally stepped back, hands raised like he was the calm one, and walked away. Or at least he pretended to. On the way home, I had this crawling feeling on the back of my neck, like we were being followed. When we turned onto our street, I turned around. He was there, half a block back, pretending to look at his phone. We sped up. So did he. I wanted to run, but I also did not want to scare my son more than he already was. Once we were inside, we locked the door, closed the curtains, and I had what can only be described as a controlled panic attack. My husband kept his voice calm for our son's sake, putting on a cartoon to distract him, but his jaw was clenched so tightly I was worried his teeth might crack. We peeked through a tiny gap in the curtain and saw my ex standing on the opposite sidewalk, staring at our house. That night he came back. He stood in our front yard, yelling my name, yelling my son's name, yelling that he would not be ignored, that we could not erase him from his own child's life. Neighbors came out onto their porches. Lights turned on up and down the street. My son started crying, asking why that man was screaming. That was the moment something in me snapped. The fear burned off and left something sharper behind. I grabbed my phone and called the police. I told them there was a man on my property yelling, refusing to leave, that we had a complicated history, that I was scared he might try to break in. My husband went outside but kept his distance, telling my ex to leave the property, to stop yelling, to think about the child inside the house. My ex kept going on about his rights, about bloodlines, about destiny, like he had swallowed an old movie script and was now choking on it. 2 officers showed up surprisingly fast. They talked to him first, then came to talk to me. I showed them the adoption papers, the clause where he had given up rights, the notes from my lawyer, everything. They nodded, took statements, explained to him that he was trespassing, that he needed to leave. He refused. He kept arguing, his voice getting louder, saying the system was corrupt, that they were helping a mother keep a child from his real father. They warned him. He did not care. Eventually, they put handcuffs on him and walked him to the car while he kept yelling. My son watched from inside, peeking from behind the curtain, and I knew this image was going to live in his head for a long time in some fuzzy, confusing way. The neighbors pretended not to look, which always makes it more obvious that they are looking. After the car drove away, the street felt too quiet. The officers suggested that I consider filing for a restraining order. They said they had seen situations like this escalate, and that having something official in place might give us a layer of protection. My lawyer had already mentioned that as a possibility, so this was not a surprise. I called her again the next day, voice still shaky, and we started the process. It was paperwork and waiting, like most things that travel through the legal system. Around that time, through mutual contacts, I heard he had been arrested for drunk driving a few months earlier and was already on probation. I did not think much of it then, just filed it away as one more sign that his life was unraveling. While the request was being processed, he found new ways to be present. Messages from unknown numbers, friend requests from obviously fake profiles online. I started saving everything in a folder. I stopped going places alone unless I had to. My world, which had finally started to feel open again, shrank right back down to the size of our house, my job, and the safest routes between them. One afternoon, I came home and found an envelope pushed under the front door. No name, no stamp, just my first name written on the front in a handwriting I recognized. My husband wanted to throw it away without opening it, but my curiosity won. Inside was a letter, several pages long. It started with more of the same: apologies, explanations, accusations. He wrote about his mother's confession in more detail this time, talking about how she had told him everything from her hospital bed, how she had admitted to staging some of the so-called evidence, like vaguely describing my coworker as a stranger she had seen me with, or conveniently forgetting to mention context when she told him stories. He wrote about how betrayed he felt, how his whole world had gone off its axis, how he had started therapy too late to save anything. In between those paragraphs, There were lines that blamed me. He said I should have fought harder, that I had given up too soon, that true love would not have let a meddling mother win. He wrote that he understood why I was angry, but that I was being cruel by keeping his son away from him now that the truth was out. The tone shifted from remorse to accusation so many times that reading it felt like being thrown around in a small boat during a storm. Near the end, his writing got messier. He mentioned feeling watched, feeling judged, losing jobs because he could not focus, drinking too much, not sleeping. He said some things that made my skin crawl, about sometimes standing near our house just to feel close to the life that should have been his. There was a line about how, if he could not be in his son's life, maybe it would be better if none of them had to live with this situation. I did not have to be an expert to recognize how alarming that sounded. I took the letter straight to my lawyer. She read it, her face tightening at the more worrying lines. She said it was good, in a twisted way, to have this kind of thing documented, because it showed a pattern of unstable behavior. It would, she said, help our case for the restraining order. I hated that my safety depended on collecting pieces of someone else's unraveling mind. I hated that a man who had thrown me out while I was pregnant now had this new storyline, where he was the tragic victim of a manipulative mother and a cold ex-wife. The restraining order was eventually granted. It prohibited him from coming near our home, my work, my son's school, or contacting us in any form. I slept better for exactly 3 nights. Then he violated it. He showed up near the school one afternoon, standing across the street while my son was walking out with his backpack and art project. A teacher noticed him lingering, recognized him from the incident reports we had given them, and called the school office. By the time I arrived, he had already left, but the fact that he had been there at all made my legs tremble. We called the police, filed another report, added this to the growing pile. Each time, the consequences escalated. Fines, court dates. Eventually, after repeated violations, his probation for a completely separate incident was revoked, and he was sent to prison for a while. That should have made me feel safe. Instead, it just made me tired. Tired of his shadow. Tired of the way his choices kept echoing through my life years after I had walked away. Around that time, my husband brought up moving again. Not just to another neighborhood, but to another state entirely. A fresh start somewhere farther away, where public records and old habits would not place us on the same map as this man. At first, the idea of uprooting my son again made me flinch. He had friends at school. He knew the streets. He loved his room. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that staying was its own form of risk. We had done everything right on paper, and still my ex had managed to find ways to shake our sense of safety. We spent months planning. My husband applied for jobs in other cities. I talked to my boss about possible transfers, and when that was not an option, about starting over somewhere else. We sold furniture, donated clothes, sorted through boxes I had been carrying from apartment to apartment since before I even met my ex. In the process, I found old photos of us at the lake, tickets from bus rides, notes we had written each other in the early days. I sat on the floor one night surrounded by those little paper ghosts, and instead of crying, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the distance between that girl and the woman I had become felt like the punchline to a joke I had not realized I was living. Saying goodbye to the people who had held me up was the hardest part. My parents, of course, promised to visit. They said they were just glad I was choosing safety over stubbornness. My college friend, the one whose spare balcony had started this whole story, drove in for a day between her own shifts. We hugged, laughed about how differently things had turned out from that first week at the lake, and promised not to let our contact slip again. My friend in the building, the teacher who had opened her door to a pregnant stranger years ago, came over with a bottle of cheap sparkling juice in plastic cups. We sat on my half-empty living room floor, leaning against a wall where paintings had hung not so long ago, and reminisced about all the times she had watched my son so I could go to appointments, or cry in my car, or just take a shower without someone calling my name. She reminded me of the day she saw my things piled outside my old apartment. She said she had known, in that moment, that our lives were going to be tangled together for a while. She hugged me so tight my ribs hurt and made me promise to send pictures of our new place. I promised. I meant it. We moved to a town on the other side of the country. We moved when my son was 10. New time zone, different climate, streets with names I kept mispronouncing. My son adjusted faster than I did, of course. Kids are like that. He made a friend on the first day of school because they both liked the same kind of superhero. My husband started his new job, learning new office politics, new coffee machines, new names. I got a job in another sales position after a few months of interviews that made me doubt everything about myself. But eventually someone decided I was worth a chance. Our new house was smaller than I had once dreamed of as a teenager, but it was ours. No one else had keys. No one walked in unannounced. The only unexpected visitors were delivery people and the occasional neighbor asking if we wanted to join some community event. I still had my moments. Nights when I jolted awake because I thought I heard someone yelling outside. Days when an unknown number calling would send my heart into my throat. But slowly, like water wearing down a stone, the panic lessened. 2 years after the move, when he was 12, my old neighbor, the teacher, called me one evening. We still talked regularly, sending updates and pictures and little complaints about adult life. This time she sounded hesitant, like she was not sure she should say what she was about to say. She had run into someone who mentioned my ex. Apparently he'd been released from prison. He was living in some small town a few hours away, working odd jobs, keeping to himself. There had been no visits to our old house, no new scenes in front of familiar yards. It seemed, for all intents and purposes, like he had finally retreated into his own life. When I hung up, I sat at our kitchen table for a long time, staring at the magnets on the fridge holding up my son's drawings. He had drawn our family as 3 stick figures holding hands. No fourth person hovering in the background. No ghost. Just us. I realized that for him, this was his normal. A mother who sometimes got quiet and distant when certain topics came up. A father who made terrible jokes and good pancakes. Grandparents he saw on video calls and during holidays. One day, when he is older, we will tell him the full story. We will sit him down and explain about biology and paperwork and choices and consequences. We will tell him that there was a man who helped bring him into this world and then chose to step out of it, and another man who chose to walk in and stay. Sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and my thoughts are louder than I want them to be, I think about the version of my life that could have existed if his mother had chosen honesty instead of control. Maybe we would have fought like normal couples do. Maybe we would have stayed together. Maybe we would have fallen apart anyway for completely different reasons. There is no way to know. All I have is the version that did happen. The lock changed, the boxes outside the door, the baby born without his father in the room, the years of rebuilding, the man who came later and chose us with his eyes fully open. People love to say everything happens for a reason. I hate that phrase. It makes pain sound like some kind of cosmic scheduling issue. I do not think there was a reason I had to be thrown out of my home while carrying a child. I do not think there was a reason my son has a father he will only know through carefully edited stories, and one day, if he wants, maybe a photo. What I do think is that we get to decide what we do with the mess that other people drop at our feet. My ex will probably spend the rest of his life trying to figure out where his story went off the rails. Maybe he will frame himself as the victim of a manipulative mother and a cold ex-wife. Maybe he will do the work and actually face how he let his fear and dependence ruin everything. That is his burden to carry, not mine. My job is to raise my son in a house where secrets do not sit at the dinner table like extra guests, where love is not measured in how much control you have over someone, where apologies actually come with changed behavior. On the worst days, when old memories sneak up on me, I remind myself of something simple. I did not throw myself out. I did not pile my own belongings outside a door and change the lock. I did not choose a lie over a conversation. I did not stand in a yard screaming about blood while a child cried inside. When you strip away all the dramatic parts of the story, all the twists and confessions and courtroom papers, it really comes down to that. He made his choices. I made mine. And sitting here now, in a small kitchen in a town I did not know existed a few years ago, watching my son draw another set of stick figures with the same 3 little bodies holding hands, I can finally say, without shaking, that I chose right.